A black CEO was ambushed on live television, but his response was so devastating that even the audience turned against the host. The studio lights bathed the sleek, modern set of the Sterling Hour in a soft glow. A morning talk show watched religiously by suburban households as they sipped coffee and scrolled through their phones. At the helm sat Valerie Sterling, a seasoned host with razor-sharp instincts. Her charisma made her a force to be reckoned with, a woman both admired and feared in the industry. Valerie had built her career on hard-hitting interviews. She had a reputation for making politicians squirm, rattling Hollywood elites, and blindsiding corporate leaders who assumed they were stepping into a routine conversation. Today, her guest was Nathaniel Kane, the founder and CEO of Sentient Dynamics, one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. His company's advancements in AI had revolutionized industries, from healthcare to law enforcement to global finance. But it wasn't just his success that had the audience watching with bated breath. It was something unspoken, something deeper. Nathaniel Kane was a black man in a space historically dominated by white faces. And that, more than anything, made him a target for subtle, calculated scrutiny. He sat poised in his chair, a picture of composure in his navy blue suit. His expression was unreadable as the countdown to the live broadcast ticked away. No sign of nerves, no restless fingers. This wasn't his first time on national television, and it certainly wasn't his first time facing someone like Valerie. Across from him, Valerie crossed her legs, her polished smile in place. Warm on the surface but honed to a blade's edge. The camera's red light blinked to life. She turned to the audience, her voice smooth, practiced. Good morning, everyone. Today we have an important discussion ahead. Our guest is a man whose work is shaping the future of artificial intelligence, one of the most influential figures in tech today. She pivoted, locking her gaze on Nathaniel. But with great power comes great responsibility and controversy. Her tone shifted, carrying a barely concealed edge. Mr. Kane, thank you for being here. Nathaniel nodded slightly. I appreciate the invitation. Her smile widened, just enough to show teeth. Let's get right to it. Your rise has been nothing short of extraordinary. Some call it a testament to merit. Others wonder if it's a product of a system trying to correct past injustices. The words were a weapon, carefully designed to provoke, not to inquire. Nathaniel exhaled slowly through his nose, already recognizing the game she was playing. But what Valerie didn't know was that she had already lost before the conversation had even begun. The audience, however, wasn't prepared for what was about to unfold. Nathaniel remained still, his expression neutral, his mind calculating. He had faced tougher rooms than this. Investors who saw his skin before they saw his brilliance. Executives who masked their doubt behind forced smiles. Valerie Sterling? She was just another test. The silence stretched, just long enough to make the audience shift in their seats. Then finally he spoke. That's an interesting way to put it, he said smoothly. Are you asking if I earned my success or if it was handed to me? Valerie gave a rehearsed chuckle, the kind designed to make her guest seem defensive, paranoid. Oh, not at all, Nathaniel. I'm just saying that in today's world, diversity initiatives are a factor. And while that's a positive thing, some might wonder, do they sometimes tip the scales unfairly? A murmur rippled through the audience. The tension, though unspoken, was palpable. The kind of moment that made viewers at home lean in a little closer. Nathaniel didn't react. No tightening of the jaw, no stiffening of the shoulders. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if weighing something. Let's break that down, he said, his voice measured. You're suggesting that making an effort to include talent that has historically been excluded somehow negates merit. But if that were true, then tell me. Why? When I step into a room full of CEOs, Am I still the only one who looks like me? The words hit their mark. For the first time, Valerie's composure faltered. Well, it's a complex issue, she began. But Nathaniel wasn't done. Is it? He asked, voice steady. Because to me, it seems simple. For the first time, people who were always qualified are finally being given opportunities. But when someone like me succeeds, no one asks how many sleepless nights I spent building something from the ground up. No one asks how many sacrifices I made. Instead, the question is, was it a handout? A single clap echoed from somewhere in the audience before being quickly stifled. Valerie straightened, regaining her footing. I think what people are really wondering... No, Nathaniel cut in smoothly. I think what you're wondering is if I deserve to be here. Silence. For the first time, Valerie's carefully curated smile faltered. Barely, but enough. And the camera caught it. Nathaniel leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, completely unbothered. I get it, he said conversationally. It's easier to believe that someone like me was given something than to admit that for decades, people like me were kept out. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. But Valerie wasn't finished, and she was about to make a mistake she couldn't take back. Her smile returned, but this time, it was stretched too thin. She had to regain control. This was her show. She let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head slightly. Nathaniel, she said, adopting a patronizing tone, I think you're misunderstanding me. No one is questioning your intelligence or your talent. You've built something extraordinary. But we can't ignore that diversity initiatives have changed business landscapes. And some argue that, despite their good intentions, they sometimes lead to less qualified candidates being elevated over those who might be better suited. There it was. The mask had slipped. Nathaniel inhaled deeply, not with frustration, but with the patience of a man who had heard this argument too many times before. He gave a single nod. I see exactly what you're saying, he said. But let me ask you something. When was the last time a white CEO sat in this chair and was asked if they deserved to be here? The air left the room. When was the last time a Fortune 500 company hired an average white man and people turned around and said, maybe he didn't earn it. Maybe the system helped him get here. Valerie opened her mouth, but Nathaniel wasn't finished. Because if we're going to talk about unearned opportunities, then let's be honest about who has really been benefiting from them for centuries. Silence. Heavy. Inescapable. And in that moment, it wasn't just Valerie who had lost. It was the entire flawed narrative she had been trying to sell. The room was silent now, but it wasn't the comfortable kind of silence, the one that settles in after a pleasant conversation. No, this was something else, a tension so thick it clung to the air, making every breath feel heavier. Nathaniel Kane sat across from Valerie Sterling, the host who had built her career on controlled debates and subtle jabs, on always maintaining the upper hand. But now, for the first time in her career, she was losing control of the narrative. And worse, she knew it. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady, as if examining her reaction like a puzzle to be solved. For decades, companies have been run by men who all look the same, he said, his voice smooth, measured. And yet, no one ever stops to question whether they deserve to be there. A pause. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the weight of unspoken truths. No one asks if maybe that CEO had a head start because his father was in the same industry, or if that executive was promoted because he played golf at the right country club instead of outworking everyone else. His words weren't rushed. He let each one land, settle, take root. The audience was completely still now. No murmurs, no shifting in seats, just listening. Valerie's carefully trained expression faltered for a fraction of a second, so quick that most might not have noticed. But Nathaniel did. He saw it. She let out a small, calculated chuckle, trying to reclaim her footing. I think we're getting a little off track here, she said lightly. Nathaniel's head tilted just a fraction more. Are we? His tone hadn't changed, but something in it had sharpened. Because it seems to me that we're finally on the right track. The air in the studio shifted. A storm was forming, not the kind that could be seen, but the kind that could be felt. And then Valerie made a mistake. Her posture straightened slightly, her voice cooling just a bit as she said, "Well, I think some people might argue that in industries like yours, Nathaniel, companies lower the bar to meet certain expectations." It happened in an instant. The audience reacted before Nathaniel even did. A ripple of tension, an almost imperceptible inhale, the kind of collective realization that a line had just been crossed. But Nathaniel, he didn't flinch. He didn't blink. Instead, he just looked at her, studied her. Then with deliberate ease, he leaned forward, resting his hands on his knee. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "If you think the bar has been lowered," he said, "then let's raise it, right here, right now." The camera zoomed in. The audience held their breath. No one was ready for what came next. Nathaniel let the silence stretch, controlled and intentional. Let it settle. Let it amplify the weight of what he was about to say. And then, with quiet precision, he spoke again. "You say the bar has been lowered," he said, his voice never wavering. "Let's test that." He turned slightly, not just to Valerie, but to everyone watching. The millions of people in their homes, their offices, their coffee shops, hanging on to every syllable. "You said earlier that diversity initiatives might be giving opportunities to people who don't deserve them," he continued. "So let's look at the numbers." He gestured subtly with his hand, controlled, deliberate. Right now, out of the 500 companies in the Fortune 500, there are exactly 6 Black CEOs. 6, he let the number sink in, let it echo through the studio, through the screens. That's just over 1%. A murmur rippled through the audience. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, his voice unwavering. "Now tell me, if the bar were really being lowered to make room for people like me, wouldn't those numbers look a little different?" Valerie's fingers twitched on the cue cards in front of her, but she didn't interrupt. Nathaniel exhaled lightly before continuing. "You know what I had to do to get here, Valerie?" he asked, his tone never rising, never breaking. "I had to build a company from nothing. I had to walk into investor meetings where they assumed I was the assistant. I had to outperform my competition 10 times over, because I knew that if I failed, it wouldn't just be me failing." He let the weight of his words settle before he added, "It would be proof, in their eyes, that people like me don't belong in this space." The silence was no longer just tension. It was revelation. He went on, his words cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Meanwhile, there are executives sitting at the top of billion-dollar corporations right now because their father made a few phone calls." He let that truth sit for a moment. "And nobody questions whether they belong." The audience shifted in their seats, nodding, absorbing. Valerie sat up straighter, trying to regain her composure. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice even, "I think you're making some broad generalizations. No one is denying that you've worked hard, but—" Nathaniel didn't let her finish. "The reality," he said smoothly, "is that people only ask these questions when someone who looks like me succeeds." He let the statement hang between them, a mirror reflecting back at her. When a white executive takes over a major company, no one assumes he got there because of a diversity initiative. No one turns to him and asks, "Hey, do you think you got this job because someone lowered the bar?" Valerie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Nathaniel exhaled lightly, shaking his head just a fraction. And then, the final blow. "You don't actually care about merit," he said quietly, meeting her gaze head-on. "You care about keeping people like me from having a seat at the table." The room was still. Valerie's polished mask was cracking now, just enough for the cameras to catch it. And that's when everything changed. For the first time in her career, Valerie Sterling looked rattled. It was subtle, just a shift in posture, a flicker in her expression, but it was there, and millions of viewers at home would replay it, over and over, just to be sure. She tried to recover. She had to. "Well, Nathaniel," she began, her voice softer now, careful, "I think we can all agree that these conversations are nuanced. No one is saying you haven't worked hard." Nathaniel smiled, not the kind of smile that signaled agreement, the kind that said, "I see exactly what you're doing." "Except that's exactly what you're saying," he replied smoothly. "You didn't invite me here to talk about my company. You didn't want to discuss the technology we're developing or how it's shaping the future." His voice was soft, steady, cutting. "No, you brought me here to ask if I deserve my place." He let the words linger, each one sharp as glass. And that, Valerie, is the real problem. The audience was no longer just watching. They were witnessing. "I've spent my entire career proving myself to people who started 10 steps ahead of me," Nathaniel continued, "and I will keep doing it. Not because I need your validation, but because I refuse to let the next generation of people who look like me grow up believing they have to apologize for their own success." The first clap came, then another, then the kind of applause that wasn't polite. It was a statement. Valerie glanced toward the control booth, likely searching for a way out, but there wasn't one. She forced a smile. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "we certainly appreciate your perspective, but the battle had already been lost." Nathaniel Kane sat back in his chair, perfectly composed. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just let the moment be, because nothing else needed to be said. The phrase Nathaniel had turned back on Valerie was no longer just words spoken in a heated exchange. It had become a battle cry. The internet was ablaze, and the reaction was immediate, relentless, and unstoppable. Within minutes, memes flooded social media, each one sharper than the last. One side reveled in what they called one of the most masterful dismantlings ever broadcast on live television. The other side scrambled, desperate to reframe the narrative, twisting words, shifting blame, trying to contain a wildfire already out of control. Nathaniel scrolled through his phone as he walked, his sharp eyes scanning the chaos unfolding in real time. A viral tweet, already racking up hundreds of thousands of likes. Valerie Sterling just learned in real time that some men come prepared for the ambush. Absolute Masterclass by Nathaniel Kane. A trending YouTube clip. This is what happens when you challenge a man who built his empire from the ground up. Watch until the end. She had nothing left. And of course, the inevitable counterattacks. A headline from a certain network grasping at straws. Did Nathaniel Kane bully a female host on live TV? Debate or public shaming? Nathaniel let out a quiet breath through his nose, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Predictable. He had been in this game long enough to know that when people lost an argument, their last defense was to rewrite history. Beside him, his assistant Jordan was still glued to his phone, shaking his head. "Sterling's team is already in full-blown damage control. They're saying she was just asking tough questions and that you overreacted." Nathaniel chuckled, a low, knowing sound, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Of course they are." But the damage had already been done. And this time, it wasn't his. Reputation at stake. That night, the official YouTube channel of the Sterling Hour uploaded the full interview. Not a carefully edited, damage-controlled version, not the polished clips they could shape to fit their narrative. No, they posted the entire thing, uncut, raw. The truth laid bare for millions to see. Within 2 hours, it was the #1 trending video. By morning, it had 12 million views. Corporate America was watching. Media executives were watching. Valerie's sponsors were definitely watching. And for the first time, she wasn't the one holding the magnifying glass. She was under it. This wasn't just about a difficult interview. It was about a pattern, one that had existed for years, now dragged into the unforgiving light of public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's inbox was filling at an unprecedented rate, but not with apologies, not with backlash, with opportunities, speaking invitations, requests for interviews. A major business magazine already inquiring about a feature. The world wasn't just applauding his performance. They wanted more. And deep down, he knew this wasn't just a moment. This was a movement. This was the beginning of something far, far bigger.